The Batman is finally here. Matt Reeves' take on the character finally drops this weekend, but Warner Bros. Did something special. They had fan first premieres on Tuesday night, which I went to see. So I got to see the movie early, and it was an awesome experience. While I do think it's a little early to say this is the best Batman movie ever, I think it's still pretty high up there. Matt Reeves really shows an understanding of this character and crafted a really unique take on this story that we've seen a lot of times, but not in this way. One of the first things that stood out to me about this movie was its depiction of Gotham. I think this is one of the more immersive versions of the city that we've seen in a long time, probably since the Tim Burton version. It feels very grimy, dark. Gotham itself does feel like a character in this movie. It just feels that fresh and unique. I was really just in awe of all the stuff I was seeing on screen. This movie was shot so well. I just love the overall atmosphere of the city in this movie. I love the production design, especially when they go to more beat up looking places, more rundown places. You can tell that the city is still figuring itself out and there's still a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface. Next thing I think it really stands out to me is the story. I love that as Batman is solving this mystery, you seeing how he comes across different people and how each of their individual stories plays into the bigger picture of what's going on. Something that really stood out to me, like from the first scene, is that this movie almost doesn't feel like a superhero movie. It feels more like an actual crime thriller. It feels like I'm watching these cops and detectives trying to solve a case and catch a serial killer, which it is. But then there's Batman and there's Penguin and there's Catwoman. It kind of reminds me of Joker in 2019, where you see all these DC characters and locations being used, but the movie itself doesn't quite feel like what we've seen in the comic book genre before. It does feel like it almost stands on its own, which I think really works to its benefit. You do still have the superhero elements, you have the gadgets, you have the action, you have the names of characters that you may recognize, but it still all feels grounded. It feels like a real lived in environment. The story makes a lot of sense, and everything connects really well. Performance wise, everybody killed it. I think the casting across the board was so great. Colin Farrell disappeared into his role as the Penguin. If I didn't know it was him, I would have been completely shocked because you can't even recognize him because of the makeup, which I really hope gets Oscar recognition next year. I know it's a hard ask because this movie's coming out so early in the year, but I really think the makeup on Colin Farrell is next level. Zoe Kravitz is great as Selena Kyle. She brings a lot of pathos to the character. You understand where she's coming from and how her motivations slightly differ from Bruce Wayne's, but also aren't that different. And they address that in this movie. Her chemistry with Robert Pattinson as Batman is also one of the best parts of the movie for sure. Jeffrey Wright does a great job as Jim Gordon. Since this is only year 2 of Bruce Wayne being Batman, you see that people are still kind of hesitant with him and they really question his relationship with Jim Gordon. But I think Jeffrey Wright does a great job of playing that balance where he's trying to do his job, he puts his trust into this guy, and he really has to step up for him a lot because there's so many people in the police department and the city as a whole who doubt Batman because they think he's just a crazy guy dressed up as a bat, which you could argue he is. But again, Jim Gordon and Batman's relationship, I think, is one of the strongest parts of this movie. Seeing them as partners, going through these riddles, trying to figure out what the Riddler's up to, that is one of the most engaging parts of this movie. And I think a big reason why that all works is because of Jeffrey Wright's performance. Robert Pattinson, of course, is great as Bruce Wayne / Batman, but I think in this movie he is more on the Batman side. You don't see him as much as Bruce Wayne, and if he is Bruce Wayne, he's doing more covert stuff, so he's kind of like Batman without the suit. Again, since this is an early version of Batman, he's very rough around the edges. He doesn't always stick the landing. His suit is still not fully like what we recognize as Batman, but it still looks like Batman, and he's still figuring it out. That's a big thing about this movie, is that Batman is still figuring it out. They do skip the origin story and they just get straight into him being Batman, but that doesn't mean he's fully realized as Batman quite yet. He's still learning what it means to be this protector of the city, and Robert Pattinson does a great job of conveying that and also conveying the weight of what Bruce Wayne has to deal with, because during this mission, he learns things about his legacy, about his family's legacy that really rocks him to his core. And so he really has to reconcile with that as he's trying to stop the Riddler, which I think Robert Pattinson does really well. And of course, the big bad, Paul Dano. He is great as the Riddler. This version of the Riddler does feel more like a serial killer. I think he's kind of somewhere in between the Jim Carrey version, who's like super goofy and like over the top, and then the version that we saw in the Gotham TV series, who is a little more on that unhinged side, more serial killery. I think Paul Dano is kind of in between them, but I feel like he leans more towards the unhinged side, where he's very intelligent and he knows what he's doing, but when he comes face to face with Batman, you start to see that, yeah, there's something off about him. And then in terms of themes, I just love how this movie deals with legacy. It does touch on Batman's origin without explicitly talking about it. You just know. And again, there's elements of Riddler's plan that tie into Bruce Wayne's past, his family's past, which I think really adds to this version of the character. Towards the third act, without getting into spoilers, I liked how the Riddler's plan and his ultimate endgame forces Batman to take a look at what he's doing, why he's doing it. It makes him take a look back and think, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I inspiring people in the way I want to? I think that's such a smart way of approaching Batman, especially in his earlier years. In previous versions of Batman, we don't really see the early years. We don't see him really trying to figure things out. They kind of skip ahead to the part where he already has a really nice suit, where he has a cool Batmobile already, and things are just figured out. I mean, of course, he's still learning along the way, but a lot of the early stuff is usually cut out of those movies. They kind of just skip from Ra's al Ghul straight to him being Batman. But this is the first movie where you're really seeing him learn. You're really seeing him make mistakes and trying to figure out what he really is to the people of Gotham. In terms of action, I think all the fight scenes were great. I really like the scenes with Catwoman. I love how she fights in this movie. The Batmobile is awesome. They actually use it very sparingly in this movie, so when you do get to see it, it is very impactful. You see a little bit of it in the trailer, but that whole scene, once you see it, is pretty great, especially on IMAX. Now, overall, I do think they do a great job of balancing all these characters, but I do feel like Alfred does start to take a backseat, especially towards the second half of the movie. But where we do see him towards the beginning, you see him helping Bruce Wayne, of course, helping him solve the riddles and figure out what the Riddler's up to. And then you also see Bruce Wayne confront him when certain things come to light. That conflict was done really well. But again, you don't really see it as much of Andy Serkis as I thought you would. But again, there's so much going on in this movie. I understand. I do hope if they are doing more movies that he does get to have a more prominent role as time goes on. Overall, I think this is a solid first movie for this iteration of Batman. They do set up some really cool things for the future, but thankfully, since this movie is not technically connected to the other movies in the DC universe, they don't have to worry about continuity, so they really can do their own thing. They tease some cool stuff. It's very subtle, but it does get me excited for the future of this version of the character. It also gets me excited for the Gotham PD series that's eventually coming to HBO Max. I think people are really going to enjoy this, and according to the critics and Rotten Tomatoes stuff, people are, but this is definitely worth seeing in theaters. If you can see it in IMAX, please do. So if you're watching this from the future and you've seen the movie already, let me know what you thought down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.